To get us started, let me just again say welcome to this process pop-up with Ilia Delio, sponsored by Process and Faith. Process and Faith is a program of the Center for Process Studies, and we describe ourselves as a multi-faith network for relational spirituality and the common good. And basically, we root ourselves in the process and relational philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead primarily, but also the theologians who followed his work and kept writing after he passed away. And so those are our roots. If you go to our faith, processandfaith.org, that's where you registered for this event, but you can also see that we have many paths. We seek to bring together and provide resources to many of the different religious paths. And so based on the Harvard Pluralism Project, we list 19 paths, and you can, for free, register to be a member of Process and Faith, and then you can sign up for one or more of those paths. And we'll be then keeping you informed about different resources and things like that. And then you can access also as a member the resource pages for those paths, and there's all kinds of things there in those areas. So again, my name is Sherry Kling. I'm Director of Process and Faith, and welcome to this event we have put together for this evening with Ilia Delio called The Not Yet God and the Relational Whole. And let me just do a quick introduction of Ilia. She is a Franciscan Sister of Washington, D.C., and an American theologian who specializes in the area of science and religion, and has particular interests in evolution, physics, and neuroscience, and the import of those topics for theology. And I had the great pleasure of, well, first, I guess I was on Ilia's podcast, Hunger for Wholeness, which I highly recommend, is a great podcast. But then I got to meet Ilia at a conference we had at Villanova that the Center for Process Studies and Ilia's Center for Christogenesis co-sponsored on Whitehead and Teilhard de Chardin. So that was a wonderful event. But anyway, with no further ado, let us please welcome Ilia Delio, our speaker for this evening. Ilia, I hope you can unmute yourself. If not, we'll
Yeah, got it.
There you go. Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sherry, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm delighted to be with you. I do have a little bit of a cold. I'm in Villanova, Pennsylvania, where it snowed yesterday, so it's that time of the year. But I do want to share with you some thoughts about my new book, The Not Yet God. And, as I was reflecting on, there's so much in this book and what to highlight here, but part of my my quest for a living God, for a God who is a relational whole, is that we're living in tumultuous times, conflicted times, and in some ways, I thought part of our times is that we can't get over ontology. We can't get over being. We have sort of an addiction to being. And while we talk about relationships and relations, and we're learning so much more from science today about deep relationality, there's something about us that just kind of clings to beingness, being as being, almost in that substantive way. And that really plays out even how we conceive this, the notion of God. So let me share some slides with you based on the book, and let's see how we understand at least what I'm trying to say, and then we could have some discussion around it. So I titled it The Not Yet God, and I did that in a provocative way. Sometimes we talk about God as if we actually know what we're talking about, because we tend to anthropomorphize God. We make God into a big one of us, and then we kind of attribute to God things that we do. We know everything, we can control things, and this type of anthropomorphizing. And I guess one of the challenges here is, what is God? What does this word refer to? And I think I think rather than say, I know who God is, I know God, even if I know God by way of experience, I think we should step back in humility and say, who is God and what is God, even more so. So um, I am very much inspired by the work of Alfred North Whitehead, primarily because Whitehead saw the problem, I think, of the metaphysics of being in the 20th century. He saw the problem of religion becoming sort of a self-enclosed idea of doctrines that, in a sense, unhelpful. And he recognized the need for science and religion to not only work together, but in a sense, come together in an integrative, in a consonant way. And his famous line from his 1925 article on science and religion still holds merit. Religion will not regain its power until it can face change in the same spirit as does science. Its principles may be eternal, but how we understand those principles must change as our understanding of matter and the world changes. Now, what do we mean by the power of religion? I think that's a question that Teilhard de Chardin will, I think, help us out with here. It certainly doesn't mean sort of the triumph of religion as if we have different religions and one is better than the other. The word power means the capacity to persuade. And I think religion in this sense is what is the real power of persuasion towards the whole of which we're part of. And so I think for both Whitehead and Teilhard de Chardin, who I've studied closely over the last 15 years or so, really took science as a starting point for both philosophical and theological reflection. I don't think we can I don't think we can adequately do theology today apart from modern science, nor can we do philosophy today adequately apart from modern science. And so they were very aware that we live in this hot Big Bang universe, which is the best operative understanding at this point, although, cosmology is certainly by no means a done deal. The whole question of space and time has really gone under major, major revisions. And this little saying here, I think, kind of captures how Einstein's theory of relativity really turned over the Newtonian world of absolute space, absolute time, and matter as atoms or substance. In this little ditty, we have matter tells space how to curve, and curved space tells matter how to move. It's really interesting because space-time now is one continuum in which time itself really takes on a whole new role relative to the observer. So some people have even questioned whether or not time exists at all. This world of energy, which is part of Einstein's theory of special relativity, I think was very revolutionary. I think Whitehead was one of the first to really catch on to the way quantum physics revolutionized physics itself. In fact, revolutionized metaphysics itself by saying that matter and energy are not two different things, but they're actually two forms of the same stuff. They are just different. Matter is a form of energy, and that form of energy has a certain mass, and mass is conserved as that form can change through different energy levels. So how we, if I come back here, one of the things about quantum physics is that from the early experiments, we realized that because all matter is a form of energy, it exists in sort of a very strange state that scientists called a wave-particle duality. So we might say that this world of matter is really a world of infinite potentialities or infinite possibilities. And the way, in a sense, we can know any one possibility if we visualize it by an act of observation. And the role of the mind in the determination of matter became a focal point for not only a new understanding of quantum physics, but even for how we understand matter itself. And so there are different theories today about the philosophy of mind, but I think one of the most compelling ones in light of quantum physics is that of panpsychism. Philip Goff is a philosopher who is a strong proponent of panpsychism, as is Thomas Nagel and Galen Strawson and other philosophers. It's the belief that everything material, however small, has an element of individual consciousness. Now, I think maybe 120 years ago or 150 years ago, we said that is completely ridiculous. That consciousness is something that humans have. Matter is inert, it's no form of mind. But today we know just a lot more about how, you might say, information works, that consciousness itself may be sort of like the overlapping waves of the wave particle duality. So we just have some small inklings that lead us to say that, yeah, there could be an element of consciousness or informational flow within the smallest of elements of matter. So panpsychism is the view that consciousness is a fundamental feature of all physical reality. So the water is conscious, sand is conscious, the sky is conscious, every grain of sand is conscious. And that's something we still have yet in the West. So it's a Western, the problem of panpsychism to me is a Western problem, not an Eastern problem. And I might have more to say, further on, but I'm beginning to see more and more that a lot of our problems today really stem from the West and are in an imposition of a Western form of metaphysics imposed on the rest of the world. All right, anyway, panpsychism, no matter what it is, everything in nature has a physical and a non-physical component. That is a sort of a material component and a mental component. And this account is what we mean by panpsychism. All the elements of the physical world are also mental. And that gives nature a livingness to it. And so this is Teilhard de Chardin's idea of things, that mind and matter are two aspects of the same stuff of all reality. Which means then that what accounts for our minds, our human minds, is already operative within the fundamental forces of nature itself. We can say, the whole universe on the level of thought or self-thinking mind. That's a very different concept than as we thought about the humans, say, in the 13th century. So, David Bohm and others have posited that the nature of the universe is undivided wholeness. And by wholeness here, we mean the inclusive unity of mind and matter in this. So observer and observed are, in a sense, a unified whole. Part of this whole web of interrelated energy. Now, Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit, who never met Whitehead, by the way, as far as I can tell, nor did he ever refer to his writing. So it's very, very interesting that they were thinking along very similar tracks, but slightly, different by their circumstances. Teilhard spoke about a whole in evolution. So he brought together this idea that, if there's an undivided wholeness, that wholeness is our experience. Our experience of anything is already an experience that we cannot reduce it to mind or matter, that it's an experience of the whole that we begin to perceive. That idea of experience being fundamental for Teilhard, which he puts in the form of vision, is also fundamental for Whitehead. But Teilhard says there's a whole that sort of governs the whole of our experience that he calls omega. It's sort of this absolute whole, the whole of reality that is, in a sense, a governing principle as wholeness, because nature is very dynamic as it evolves, as it goes through its iterations over time into new, more complexified forms. And Teilhard, I think, has been influential on me to think about this whole in evolution. And he says this whole is sort of driven by an energy that is unyielding in its unitive nature. It unites in such a way that new things form and nature transcends. And so he speaks about this energy as love. Love being, he says, both an energy of attraction and an energy of transcendence. And so Teilhard says love is the most universal, the most tremendous, and the most mysterious of the cosmic forces, which is still, something that we don't give enough attention to. We still speak of love and treat love as an emotion, or something that is something that we are part of. It's not really intrinsic to nature itself. But he says, this force of love energy is present from the smallest particles of the Big Bang onward into human life. And so he says the physical structure of the universe is love. And that means there's an unyielding energy in the universe that is not, despite entropy and the forces of resistance, despite breakdowns, despite cataclysmic events, this energy continues to push, to move matter into the direction of greater unified wholeness. And so he sees this wholeness first in our capacity as humans to know this universe of which we're part of, to reflect on it, and to experience this whole, and also to reflect on it, and therefore to make decisions about where we're going. And therefore, it kind of brings all this together as kind of a short trek through Teilhard, to ask this question: who will give evolution its own God? Now, that's a really interesting question. I think Whitehead, might have had, he has kind of maybe that own question in his own way, because he too kind of revolutionizes the question of God in relation to the world. Teilhard, of course, was a Jesuit priest, so his Catholic Jesuit background makes his position here even more startling and daring in some ways. I like this question, and I think we should answer it primarily because we don't have a God of evolution, and I think that's part of our problem today. We have a God of the Middle Ages, or a God of the 5th century, or just a God we invent ourselves. And, maybe whatever God works for you, we could say might work. But the truth, if we're talking about reality and the wholeness of reality, that how we understand God must be consonant with what science says. That you can't have an understanding of reality that just pushes science to the side or just ignores science. So we want an understanding of divine realities that are consonant with what we know of the physical world. Now, Teilhard said, and I think Whitehead was agreeable to this, religion is an essential aspect of nature and evolution in the same way that principles of natural selection or information support the processes of evolution. That right there puts Teilhard at an edge, right? Because we always speak about religion as revelation, like, ta-da, God did something new. But what they are saying is that without understanding evolution as a comprehensive process of mind and matter, depth and complexity, religion and science only provides half the story. And I think that's a bit of our challenge today. We sort of have half the story if we pay only attention to science. Teilhard thought that religion is biologically the necessary counterpart to the release of the Earth's spiritual energy. Even David Sloan Wilson says religion has even a biological positive effect. Because in Teilhard's words, it controls the overflow of spirit. It directs our lives. Religion pertains to that depth dimension, that transcendent dimension of what we are. So we need something, we need a way to configure this spiritual energy towards something more, which is what we name as that wholeness of God. So Teilhard thought that, God and the world form a complementary pair. So did Whitehead. God can affect the world, and the world can affect God. They are in mutual relationship. That puts us out of sync with classical theology, and certainly the world of Thomas Aquinas. Here, God is truly related to the world. We affect God's life, and the world is truly related to God. God grows by our choices in the world, or does not. So here, I guess, I just wanted to kind of maybe visualize. Now, you all look like an elite and enlightened group, but where I go to church sometimes, this is the God that's still preached. It's the grandfatherly, dove sending guy in the sky. And there's a distance, because he's bathed in light and we're in darkness, being in a fallen, depraved world. But that's not the world. Actually, this has become so not only out of sync, it's become unhelpful. It's become detrimental, quite honestly, to our health. So I want to place maybe a pastoral malpractice sign, like if you're still talking about this stuff, you're undergoing pastoral malpractice. Process theology is something like this, now God is deeply personal, and we might say that personal experience of God is sort of the light, the breath, the joy, the love we feel at the heart of our lives, but that God envelops every aspect of the world in which we live. So I've used the word entanglement throughout my book, really just to kind of convey, scientifically, entanglement's a small phenomenon, but philosophically and metaphorically, it enables us to say that there's such a deep, there's a relationality here with God. That relationship itself is first. It's relationship that gives rise to God and world, rather than God creating the world and being God. Then I want to emphasize here the inextricable intrinsic relationality between God and world that are mutually affected. So Teilhard then begins to say that if we are intrinsically related to God, that evolution is not only the universe coming to be, but God as that wholeness in evolution, that wholeness that is all of life, all mind, all matter, in that unity that is becoming more unified in and through this process of evolution. So he says, in the future, only a God who is functionally and totally omega can satisfy us. I guess maybe just to highlight here this middle portion. For Teilhard, the evolution of God and the evolution of humanity cannot be separated. And so he advocates what Carl Jung will advocate as well, is a pantheism. Now, my process friends and I have been having this ongoing discussion between panentheism and pantheism. I am in the process of building my argument here, but I am pretty sure that pantheism is the more accurate description here. Certainly, in terms of quantum entanglement, in terms of what constitutes materiality, and that God is part of this wholeness in evolution. So he says that Christianity is primarily faith in the progressive unification of the world in God. That is, it is God, world, self, and universe that is all complexified as one that's growing. It's monistic and not dualistic in any way. So he says we live in an entangled universe of inseparability, where everything is connected to everything else, including God. And Teilhard himself says, I see in the world a mysterious product of completion and fulfillment for the absolute being himself. And that, you say, so this whole thing is so, turns what we have known from our religious training, it turns it upside down, right? And we say, how is that possible that I could complete an absolute being, right? That's our first question. If God is absolute being, right, how could we in any way make a difference to that which is absolute? And the question is being, what do we mean by God's being? And therefore, I think what we are saying is that God's being is love, and love is that energy of relationship. And therefore, we are entangled in the energies of love's relationship with God. So we not only make a difference to God, but we help complete God. And that part really, we need a whole new structure of everything. We need, this is trying to get to a new myth, beginning to build a new story that we would have to eventually have new rituals, new symbols, and everything else to really bring it into full swing. But this is where I think Carl Jung becomes extremely helpful, because sometimes Teilhard's language can be very abstract. And while we have these ideas, we think, oh, well, what could this possibly mean, that I'm, related to God, or religion is a natural part of my life, or that, that even I am maybe God in my own way, and that's like, that is just, I mean, if I were to speak that in my local department here, they would definitely axe me by tomorrow. They already think I'm slightly a heretic, but now it become full blown. But here's Carl Jung. He's a genius, as are Whitehead and Teilhard. And I just put it in this way: the many gods become one. And that's really saying that as we move from polytheism to monotheism, that we come into a different level of consciousness here. The one God becomes human. Every human is to become God. Right there. That's very Christian, by the way. So I find Jung deeply Christian in his approach to religion, because matter matters, especially to Christianity. It's a religion of matter, if nothing else, right? But here, Carl Jung says religion is a natural process of individuation. Wow. Okay. Now, excuse me. Individuation. We have to talk just a little bit more there, because Carl Jung is saying that, we really have to take what we are and probe the depth we are. Individuation then becomes part and parcel to God's own becoming. And so we're out of creeds and doctrines and, all these rules that, the churches make up that you have to follow. And he really kind of brings it down to, what are we humans? So Jung believes that religion, as most of the Western world has known it, has ended. Honestly, he was pretty much on target in the 20th century. It's still around, but it's all over the place, really. And it's not that we have various religious traditions. That's actually a beauty. That's an enrichment. It is, if I take Christianity, for example, there are just maybe 50 shades of gray here, at least 32, 32, the Heinz 32 flavors. And it's a confliction. My God's and your God, we have the real thing. You're how that politicizes itself. And so religion fails to motivate us. This is just the bottom line here. It fails to do anything. It just keeps us, it keeps us going, because we need something like this. So Jung proposes that the transition or evolvement from the ego toward the self become the stabilizing center of the personality has up to now produced what he calls the modern man. Certainly we have evolved within the Homo sapiens species into more advanced levels of consciousness. This is even the brain has developed in this way. But Jung realizes that, now my slides may be a little bit not logical here, but let's see. If I go back here, yeah, okay, let me go back here. What does this mean to come into higher levels of consciousness? I think one of the things that I cover in the book is that most religions are living at a very adolescent stage of consciousness. It's about following the laws, following the order, keep the rule will keep you. And that's sort of a lower stage of consciousness. And what Jung is saying is that we really have evolved higher stages. We have more advanced stages that we can really tap into. And those higher stages lead us into a whole new perception of reality and a whole new perception of the self. And of course, he looks at Jesus, the Christ, as a symbol of the self. And in this way, Jung did not see Christ as savior, as universal savior. In fact, that idea for Jung has actually been more enervating. We have actually thrown our capacity for wholeness outside ourselves onto a savior, and we want someone else to save us. And that has actually depleted our capacities to become a new person. And so, in Jung's idea that Jesus in his own life, really enters into those levels of depth within himself, even in that sojourn into the desert, that, confronting Satan. And it's this idea of coming to a deeper level of a psychic totality of the individual. And I think that's what Jung, points out to us. We must deal with the stuff within, whether or not we like it, whether or not we want to. But what we fail to acknowledge within ourselves will in some way be acted outside ourselves. And I do think, Jung's ideas provide an understanding for why evil persists in the world. There's something about us that continues to be unreconciled within, remains fractured. And therefore, what Jung proposes is that incarnation, this God becoming flesh, is at the same time the process of individuation, becoming whole within ourselves. So Christ symbolizes the unity of the human and divine. But what he's saying is that Jesus is not the only one who is human and divine. For Jung, every person, he symbolizes what every person is, the capacity for humanity and divinity to be united. And again, he says the Book of Beatitudes is sort of the handbook for individuation, the how-to book. Like, how do I go about doing this? Again, in the Jungian world, this idea of, and what's so fascinating, so Jung is writing in the mid-20th century, but his explorations of the psyche, I find extremely insightful and novel for the time, especially since neuroscience was not really born as a discipline really until the late 70s, 80s, until we began to know so much more about the brain. But what he's saying here in terms of the ego, the self, the shadow side, the fact that we have these anima, these masculine and feminine energies, this self that's still unreconciled, and yet there, in this a personal unconscious that always part and parcel of this collective unconscious. There's something about our consciousness that is so incredibly infinite in its extent that we're not even aware of. We live most of our waking lives not even accessing most of the levels of our inner life, our unconscious life. And that's really kind of fascinating. So he has this idea that self-realization is the process of individuation. And this process itself is divinization. The more we become at home with ourselves, in other words, a reconciled self, a self that's liberated within, that becomes more unified insofar as we have come to terms with our darkness, our anger, our biases, our judgments, the hatred we might feel within ourselves, whatever those parts of ourselves that remain unhealed. And the more we enter into those places of darkness and reconcile them, the more we are liberated. And the more liberated we are, in my view, the more then we rise up into, we're freer than to enter into those higher levels of non-dual consciousness. And that's, I think, in here by the levels of psyche. So here's where I see Christ as archetype, which is exactly what Teilhard saw as well, that we see in Jesus. And we can say we might see the same in the Buddha. We might see the same in other religious figures. What I think is particular to Jesus here, at least in the way that Christianity frames this doctrine, is that this new consciousness becomes then a new structure of existence that changes the course of evolution. Jesus becomes like a new Big Bang, in evolution. So he's Jewish, And yet he comes to that depth of the reconciled self. He's fully individuated and comes to this liberated sense of God's immediate presence, and therefore a freedom to accept his mission and responsibility on behalf of the reign of God. But I guess what Jung is saying is that what happened to Jesus, that's what that in a sense, that's what's be happening in our lives as well. And that is then the liberation of the world. And that becomes redemption itself. The whole process of individuation is a redemptive process. It's what moved this world towards greater wholeness or salvation. And that's what we mean here by saying that humanity's relation to divinity lay in its relation to the unconscious or the cosmic plenum as the ground of consciousness and meaning. So I think we have systems, quite honestly, that have literally cut us off at superficial levels of the mind. We have systems that demand our attention outside of ourselves. And therefore, we are desperately seeking, I think, this process of individuation today. And of course, both Teilhard and Whitehead, Teilhard and Jung see the essential role, therefore, of mysticism here. And I think all that Jung is getting at, which is the same as Teilhard, is this God center at the heart of our lives, is what the mystics were about since like basically day one. That it's kind of timeless and beyond any particular religious tradition, whether it's Sufi or Christian. They all they all come down to the same the same root, this divine root at the heart of their lives. So just using Meister Eckhart's language, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. My me is God, to use Catherine of Siena's language. And, who preaches this? Who teaches this? We don't have a working relationship that my me is God. And that this God me, is what is to grow by a process of ongoing individualization and self-realization. And therefore acting in the world, therefore, the more I'm liberated, I act in the world, therefore, consonant with the energies of love to help move this world towards greater wholeness. So Thomas Merton's famous line as well, from the Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, at the center of our being is this point of nothingness, untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a spark which belongs entirely to God. He said, this is the pure glory of God in us. It is in everybody. And I included everything. And if we could see it, we would see these billion points of light coming together in the face and blaze of a sun that would make all the darkness and cruelty of life vanish completely. And, this is very much like Jung. Jung saying, if we did nothing else but really pay attention to what is at the heart of our lives, he says we wouldn't need armies, we wouldn't need police, we would begin to live from a different center of godness that would, in a sense, be creating a world where God becomes this wholeness of life, shines through every aspect of life. So you hear my slides a little messed up. Individuation, this process of becoming a person, a fully relational being, is a necessity. The psychological rule states that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is a loaded statement, and we would need probably the next 5 years to really unpack it, but we only have maybe 5 minutes. So, okay. When the individual remains divided within and does not become conscious of one's inner opposite, the world then must perforce act out this conflict and be torn into opposing halves. I think what we have here today, when we look at our polarizations, our deep conflicted cultures, we have a human species that's been flattened out like a pancake by the forces of modernization, by all sorts of physicalisms and materialisms that says mind is not part of this. that, your mind is something special that's added on. And we've created a world for ourselves that has literally done just the opposite of what Jung saw is the salvific path to wholeness and fullness, what Teilhard saw as well. And therefore, the Jungian sense, consciousness must be brought into unconscious darkness in this transformative process. It's not a matter of, it's funny enough, we have developed a culture of individualism because we have neglected to undergo individuation. And just, in other words, we have become very much egocentric, self-centered, because we haven't come to that wholeness by this process, the hard work of individuation. And so Jung, like Teilhard, held that God needs humankind to become both whole and complete. Hopefully my book spells this out a lot better than my presentation here, but the whole is, in a sense, that which is recapitulated in our own experience of the world. And we are, in a sense, God bearers in the truest sense, a theotokos in that way. And therefore, this higher consciousness, this wholeness that God is, the whole absolute wholeness of life, can only be actualized through us by incarnating in our own lives. So God and humanity are an entangled state together. And truly, the more we become godly in our own lives, the more we become truly human, because to be human is to be divinized. It's the strangeness of what we are. We have a capacity for divinity. And the more we, excuse me, realize the capacity, we become human, and God shines out as the whole, of which is the heart of our life. So the evolution of God and the evolution of humanity cannot be separated for neither Jung nor Teilhard. And basically, both Jung and Teilhard said through ongoing incarnation, and I take that, I honestly, we have so mechanized the incarnation as word becomes flesh, word becomes flesh. And we kind of have this idea, what do we have? I'm not sure what we have. So I think word becomes flesh is the word, the expression of your life and my life, since we are the little words of God, so to speak, we're little holes of the whole. We must, in a sense, put on, we must put on that flesh of God in our lives. God become conscious, a God consciousness. A consciousness of seeing in a way that unifies, seeing in a way that forgives, seeing in a way that does justice, seeing in a way that creates. And that's what we mean by becoming a conscious, God conscious, and completing this wholeness in directed evolution. This is what Teilhard means by the Christic. Honestly, the last part of my book is really trying to get, in fact, the whole book really leads up to this mystery of the Christic. It's all about incarnation, quite honestly. And I think sometimes, certainly I can just speak from my own experience in the Catholic world, we've made Jesus like the Christ, and we have Christ as some, universal, it's going to save everyone if you belong to the group type thing. And if you don't, too bad. But that's not it at all, right? The Christic, in fact, Teilhard spoke about a Christogenesis, a Christic process of evolution. It's this whole process of divinity coming to actuality in love through this individuating of God. And therefore, the Christ is not just us becoming something different. It's God who becomes something new in evolution. God takes on, it's God becomes more God, a larger God in love, hopefully, in evolution. And we become more than human. Raymond Panikkar said, the human person we're a very strange species. We're neither animal nor angel. We're somewhere in between. And we have this incredible divine capacity, this capacity for the infinite, this capacity to remember, this capacity for selfless love. And therefore, the Christic is actualizing that capacity in our lives so that God, human, and cosmos become a complexified whole. And that is since we are the cosmos on the level of the personal, the whole cosmos then becomes personalized and conscious. So, I guess this not yet God is saying a not yet God is a not yet world. That it's a world that's struggling in formation, struggling to become a world, struggling to become a unified place of life, all life, not just human life, but creaturely life, plant life, animal life. There's no doubt about it. We can't stay where we are. And honestly, artificial intelligence, the guys in Silicon Valley kind of know this implicitly. And AI wants to build a different world, but it can't do it adequately, in my view, without religion, without a sense of an energy directed toward wholeness, towards fullness, and towards future. So if we want a different world, we must become a different people. We have the capacity to do so, but now it's time to really rewrite the script of our myths, and realize that without religion, our planet, I mean religion by that vital religious energy that orients us toward that wholeness and fullness of life. We have it already within us, but now to find the language, the categories to actualize it into a new reality. That is our task. Thank you.